Hi, this is Midwest Katie. Thanks for stopping by. Let's can some chicken today. As with all home food preservation projects, be sure to educate yourself on proper techniques before beginning. Use resources like the Ball Blue Book, Putting Food By, or your local county extension office. Remember, I'm just a gal on the internet. Don't take my word for it. Today I'm canning white meat chicken in wide mouth pint jars. I have some used jars. I'm going to inspect those very carefully, check for any chips or cracks, then wash and sterilize all my jars. I'm going to keep them hot in a water bath canner until I'm ready to use them. I use my water bath canner only to sterilize my jars. All meats must be pressure canned. I have hard water, so I add about 1/3 of a cup of vinegar to the water bath canner to keep calcium from adhering to the jars when I sterilize them. I boil my jars and utensils for 10 minutes before beginning any canning session. I begin by trimming the chicken very well. I wash it, remove any extra fat or cartilage that I see, and cut it into large chunks. In a large saucepan, I put the chicken trimmings and some powdered chicken bouillon powder into about 2 quarts of water. I boil it for about an hour until it's a nice broth. Then I strain it and save it for filling my jars later. I place the chicken in a large non-reactive saucepan. In this case I'm using stainless steel, and I cover it with water. I bring it to a boil for just a minute or two, just so that it's no longer raw but not fully cooked. In a minute you'll see why I don't raw pack my chicken. This is why I don't raw pack meats. Any meats, not just chicken. When you boil a meat, there are proteins that leach out and form the scum that's on the top of your liquid. I don't want that scum inside of my jar. I want to be able to see what I'm getting when I can something, and I want my jars to look pretty on the shelf. That stuff inside of a canning jar is murder to scrub out once it's in there. It kind of adheres to the inside of the jar. I just don't want it. It's not worth it to me. To the left of my stove, I set up my workspace. In the sink is the hot chicken inside of a colander, which is setting inside of a large bowl. No food is touching anything in the sink, which is sterilized anyway because I do that before I start canning. I also have a plate for my utensils, a 2-quart measure with my lids and rings, and you can see that little blue magnetic wand that comes with the canning kits in there. I pour boiling water in that to cover and warm up my lids and rings. I use that electric boiling water kettle. I love that thing. That was a gift from my mom. That has been the best aid in canning. Whenever you need boiling water, the whole thing heats up in over a quart, and it heats up less than 2 minutes to boiling water. I love that. Got my plate ready to put my jars on, and I'm almost ready to start canning. It's almost time to start canning, so I lay things out so that everything's within reach. On the right you'll see my canner, which is getting warm. I have about 1.5 quarts of water. That's what my canner uses. You'll have to check your canner's manufacturer's instructions as to how much water you need to put in. And I also put in a few good glugs of vinegar because we have hard water where we live. I also have the hot boiling chicken broth that I made earlier, so that's already strained and hot and ready to go. And on the left you'll see my hot water bath canner, which has my sterilized jars inside. I pull the rack up to the top and take out 1 jar at a time when I can, and set it back in the hot water bath canner to keep warm until I set them in the canner. Now it's time to start filling the jars. I fill the jar with chicken up to the bottom ring and cover it with hot broth, making sure all of the meat is covered. I have found from experience that I have better luck with my seals if I don't overcrowd the jars. After the jar is filled, I use a non-metal object to remove any air bubbles that may force their way to the top during the venting process. In this case I use a wooden skewer. Next I take a paper towel dampened with vinegar to wipe carefully the rim of the jar to remove any fats that may be on it. This way I can be sure I'll have a better seal. I can 1 jar of chicken at a time. After I fill it with the hot chicken and the hot liquid, I put on a hot lid and a hot ring, and then I set that jar, after I tighten it firmly, back into the water bath canner to keep warm until I'm ready to set it into the pressure canner. Here you can see that all my jars are filled. I had exactly 14 wide mouth pints, and that's exactly what my canner holds. There's actually 2 layers of jars in there, 7 on the bottom and then a rack in between, and then 7 more jars on the top. I'm getting ready to put the lid on now, and we can start our venting time. Next, I put the lid on my canner. I turn the heat on to medium high and wait for steam to start coming out forcefully out of the vent. Once that happens, I set my timer for 10 minutes and allow the steam to escape, venting the canner for 10 full minutes. Once my canner has vented for 10 full minutes, I add the weight to the vent and carefully bring the pressure up to 11 pounds. This is for my area and for my canner. Please follow your canner's manufacturer's instructions for your altitude before beginning. I set my timer for 75 minutes. Pints are 75 minutes. If I were canning quarts, they would be processed for 90 minutes. As mentioned in a previous video, I park a chair right in front of my stove once my canner is up to pressure. This way I can keep track of where the pressure is on my stove. It takes just a couple minutes for the pressure to go too high, and then I have to bring it down, risking a jar crack. Or if the pressure goes below the recommended level, I have to start my timing all over again. I don't want to have to do that while I'm canning. I check it about every minute and a half. I peek at it and make adjustments as I need to. I also have my canner's notebook. I take notes on how things went for the day, what the cost of my product was, how many jars I used, or if I would have done anything in it differently. I also have my good cup of coffee there. After the 75 minutes are up, I turn the heat off of the canner and let the canner come down to pressure all the way to 0 before I take the weight off. Carefully remove the weight and place the jars on a towel on the counter to keep cool. One of the best hints I got was to cover my jars with a towel and to bring them down to a cool temperature as slowly as possible. Put a towel over the top. It prevents drafts from forming, and I have had no fails in jars in over a year since I started doing this. The next day, I checked the jars for good seals. Anything that didn't seal goes in the refrigerator, and we eat that soon. I wash the rest of the jars carefully, and when they're finished, I write chicken on the top and the date that I canned it. I learned this trick from Cat's Cradle. Store your jars back in the original box. Don't cut the plastic all the way off. Just trim it off on 3 sides, put the jars in, and then use that plastic that's still attached as a lid. It keeps the dust off it when you're storing it somewhere else. It also keeps the plastic on the sides and the bottom, and that protects the box and your counter where you're storing it as well. All told, today I got 14 pints of chicken out of my 1 canner load with no fails. I call that a good day. This is Midwest Katie saying thanks for stopping by, and I hope you learned something today.